Hello, Steve White, Steve Arts 89. This next story kind of made me a bit sad. I have seen Bob Iger out spruiking his new memoir. What was it called? The Ride of a Lifetime: Lessons Learned from 15 Years as CEO of the Walt Disney Company. He was on The View, and he's their boss, so of course they just didn't exactly ask him any hard questions. Yeah. Um, He's been surprisingly honest about a few things though, because he's still working for Disney. He's still the CEO, yet he's talking about stuff that is still relevant and current, and it's kind of weird. Who writes a biography while they're in something? It's normally what you do after, when you finish, when you leave. Um, but what made me sad was just finding out about the George Lucas situation. Now, we kind of have worked out, us fans, that when George sold Star Wars to Disney, he had a stake in the merchandise for his characters. He hadn't totally given them up. He was still getting something from them being used, um, and it was understood that that was part of it. He was selling them his babies, but they were going to take care of them, and he would still get something for them living on. Um, but then they kind of decided, well, we can save 15% of billions if we just create new characters and just edge George out by creating a new Star Wars, new characters, and not using the legacy characters anymore, which was a financial marketing merchandising decision, which was pretty cold on the fans and George, because it cuts him out, and it also just takes away what we're there for, the original Star Wars. So that was kind of shocking. But what also we found out, we knew that when J.J. Abrams had come into um, doing The Force Awakens, he had written out a outline for that trilogy and where it would go, and he was setting up a trilogy. And then Ryan Johnson, Ruin Johnson, whatever his name is, Roundhead Johnson, whatever you want to call him. People call him a lot of things, which is bad. We shouldn't call people names. He just threw out the book and decided to do his own thing. And the next director said, I can't do number 9 as I was planning to, because of the state of, I think the film was going to be based around um, um, Luke Skywalker, and he was killed. So he had to back out. So they brought JJ back to try and put it back on track. Now, he has said very, very diplomatically that Ryan Johnson, whatever his name is, didn't um, put Star Wars, didn't derail Star Wars. I think he's being nice. He did. But supposedly you couldn't not fix the problems. So he sort of said, well, I'm putting it back on the track, and he didn't totally derail it. And supposedly they're lost. They are reshooting. They have multiple endings. They don't know what direction they're going to go in, because they don't know, because there's no one idea, there's no one theme, there's no one creator, there's no one vision. It's just filmed by committee. It's just from what we're hearing, it's a mess, and they're going right up to the line, because the film's out in a few months and they're still doing reshoots now. Some people say it's just some effects being tweaked. Other people saying they are changing the storyline and reshaping it because there were problems with it and people's reactions, and no one was happy with how it was concluding, blah, blah, blah. But now we get to this other part, because back in the day, when I first saw my first featurette about George Lucas's films, about Star Wars, when he was doing the trilogy, before he did the special edition trilogy, not when he was doing the trilogy, I'm not old enough to have seen the original trilogy. I saw it on video. And this was the special THX remastered editions. And they had, I don't know if I saw it on TV and taped it, or if it was actually on the videos, but there was a little featurette, special feature, where he was talking about how he originally planned out Star Wars to be a 9-part story. and he just picked the middle part, and he always wanted to go back and do a prequel and sequel series. At the time, I thought, oh yay, more Star Wars. Later on, I thought that's bullshit. You wrote a film, and it did really well, and you thought, how can I stretch this out and make a franchise out of this? So he expanded the story of the parents of the main characters, and then the children of the main characters, basically the past and the future, and generational. This story spread over generations. Because little things like Luke and Leia and stuff like that, which slipped in, which if he had been planning the whole thing the whole time, there are some things that are obviously in the first film that wouldn't have been there. I think some people don't agree with that. So he had this idea, and he went and made the prequels, and we slagged off on them. I remember lining up for the Phantom Menace, and everyone going crazy, and barely getting in, having to sit right on the side next to the wall because it was in the front row because it was the only seat left, and just the excitement of the films, and it got lesser as they went on because people were very disappointed with the Phantom Menace, and people thought the Clone Wars had a lot of bad dialogue, and it was just an adolescent romance, and there are issues, and little did we know how great they would look in retrospect. And the third film I thought was decent. It concluded everything until we got to the Frankenstein moment where Darth Vader steps off breaks off of the bed, and does his. You've seen the scene. I'm not even gonna. I can't even. Okay, so George supposedly had also plotted out the sequel series, and when Disney bought Star Wars off him, he said, I've planned out the next stage of my story, my characters, my franchise. And they said, okay. He showed it to them. They said, oh, we should buy this. But they didn't. They basically said, but we're not obligated to make it or make it as you've done it, but we're going to buy it because we think obviously it's where to go. And then they turned around and said, let's just make up our own story with our own characters, and we don't have to pay him any money, and we can create our own Galaxy's Edge and our own theme parks and our own merchandise, and we get all the money for that, and you can just go away, and people will forget about the old Star Wars, and you can just disappear, and we'll have our Star Wars. And that was basically their marketing plan, their strategy. And George didn't know this was going to happen. George, apparently, he was very upset. He felt betrayed when he was brought out to meet JJ and the people when they were working on The Force Awakens. That was when he realized they weren't using his outlines. And he was very upset because he assumed they were going to honor their agreement and actually make his films, his next sequel, and that they had just bought it off him to make it and make the money off of it. But it was still going to be his story, his franchise as he created it, and it was going to go on, and the fans would like it, but no, they just scrapped it. So I heard all this, and I was just sitting there, and I just had this moment of, oh wow, we're never going to see the whole thing. We're never going to see the end of the saga. George's version was thrown out. What we have now is just what people are now calling fan fiction, story by committee, film by committee. It's not George's vision. It's not George's story. It's not the character's future continuation. It's just something someone made up to sell toys and marketing, which is what George was always accused of. But he always, and it's so funny, fans slagged off on George so much like they did some of the people like Rick Berman and that were in charge of Star Trek in the 90s. We slagged them off so bad. When the internet started, the first thing people started bitching about was the Phantom Menace. The first Phantom Menace. There was a Phantom Menace then. We have a new one, which is questionable, but still has a place. The original one, we tore him apart, and it was like, oh, you just made a toy movie and all this stuff. But he really did create characters he loved. He created a family, he created a story, he created a history. And when he saw the new film, he was like what I felt actually. There's no visuals. There's no... The prequels looked a bit like animation because he took Star Wars and made it 100% just fantasy, and it was so kind of over the top. It kind of felt like you were watching an animated film. Um, and on one level, I appreciate that they pulled back on the new films and filmed in real locations and made it feel real. But they also made it feel really bland and boring, and you just look like you're on Earth locations and you'd seen everything before. And there was nothing new. The original first 6 films, every film had different look, different theme, different planets, different characters. The characters all had different looks, different outfits, and you could identify everything and sell something for everything. And it was okay because we wanted the new things. We wanted the different looks, the different aliens, the different ships and everything. Now they're just the new Disney ones. It's just the same stuff repackaged, and it's all the same and bland. And that's part of the reason why I think the toys didn't sell, and they're having problems with the merchandise, and they dropped a lot. Um, I did a video talking about that because other people. I'm not an expert, but I've done a little bit of research, and I've seen a few videos and read a few articles, and the percentage that the marketing of the merchandising has dropped is considerable, considering it's I think it was more than 40% of the actual revenue for the whole franchise, on top of the films and the books and everything else, just the toys and everything. So part of the reason I think that didn't sell is because they were just selling the same characters over again, and they weren't really new and different. They're just relying, and it's weird. They tried to rely on nostalgia by regurgitating the same thing instead of creating new stuff, and it's totally failed. So now they're pulling back, and they're doing a lot of the old stuff for the merchandising. They're throwing out a lot of old characters and reissuing things and issuing the new characters and old packaging, all this sort of stuff and all these sort of things. But I don't know, this whole video was just about that moment of sadness of realizing, oh, we're never going to see George's whatever you call a 9-part film, his third trilogy. We're never going to see the conclusion. We're never going to see the ending. We're never going to know how it was supposed to end in his version, which is the real Star Wars. And that made me really sad because I did want to see it. I grew up with the first 3, and I watched the second 3, and I was looking forward to the next 3, the final 3, and we didn't get it, and we're not going to get it unless someone turns around and says, let's just reboot Star Wars and do George's trilogy. Someone could do it if they wanted to. The fans would be like, yeah, why not? I don't think they would, because it would be too disruptive to the franchise to have like this rebooted version already that sort of concludes and then excludes a whole trilogy. But I think it would make money. So I don't know, it just made me sad, and I just thought I'm just going to make a video about that. And then I did a little bit of looking and saw a lot of the issues and drama and that, and it turned out to be a bit longer. But thanks for watching. If you have any ideas or any information about that and any knowledge, feel free to let me know. And yeah, just the final one is coming in December. We'll see what happens. I'm not feeling optimistic. Bye.